Hi guys, welcome back. I now have music. I still have not thought of an idea of how to get rid of the stuff on the side, but we will talk about that later. Let's go ahead and get into part 2. All right, so let's go ahead and look. So the next day, that's where we are. So the brightness of the wintry sun next morning streamed over the breakfast table. There was an air of prosaic wholesomeness about the room, which it had lacked on the previous night. The author really likes to throw a bunch of big words at you, but remember, he published this in a newspaper, 3 different installments. He has to make sure that this second piece is just as impressive as the first. So you have words like this, but what you have to ask yourself, guys, is you don't have to understand and know every single word that's in a passage. What you have to make sure that you remember is inside, outside, squared. Remember, look inside the word, see if you recognize anything, and look outside the word. So the context is important. Word parts, family. And then, there's certain words that you have to go and look in the dictionary for. And if you think about it, there was an air of prosaic wholesomeness about the room, which it had lacked on the previous night. If you look at wholesomeness, whole meaning together, wholesomeness, this word here means it's associated with the word, good. If something is, wholesome, it's good. It's a positive thing. And, prosaic comes from the word prose is what I think of when I look at it. And this, you have prose and you have poetry. Anything that's not poetry is prose. Prose just means writing. Anytime you write, like this story, prose. So prosaic, it just means, unromantic. So not necessarily that definition, but it's just, it's a beautiful day. Obviously, the setting is completely different, right? Well, to have a good scary story setting, it has to take place at night. And well, obviously this is, during the day. So quite a different day. It's bright, warm, comfortable, opposite of the prior evening. Don't know why I have that. Oh, that's on the other page. Okay. So anyhow, Mrs. White, old soldiers are the same. I shouldn't have listened to such nonsense. How could wishes be granted in these days? And if they could, how could 200 pounds hurt you, father? Hurt you? Is this, she believes it. I mean, obviously she would say, 200 pounds. I mean, that's ridiculous. But it's almost like, well, she really wants to believe it. And here's frivolous Herbert. Frivolous, he doesn't care. And it might drop on his head. Obviously Herbert is the brains in the family. So as we're moving on, Morris said that things happen so naturally, said father, that you might, if you so wished, attribute it to coincidence, think that it was normal coincidence. It just so happened. However, Herbert again, well, don't break into the money before I come back. I'm afraid it'll turn you into a mean, avaricious man, and we shall have to disown you. So this comma here, when you have adjectives in a series, here's a cool tip. Remember how I told you when you have 2 words combined with the word or, usually the word on the one side means the same thing as the word on the other because it's this or that, which they have something in common. Another trick is this comma right here. So you have mean, which and to a mean person, mean. And then you have this word avaricious. So avaricious, and it looks like avaricious, but English is weird. And we do have patterns, but sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. For some reason, that I is, you don't hear it at all. Just to double check myself, I'm going to go ahead, go over here to my phone.
Avaricious.
Yeah. It's not, when I look at this word, I would think that, you have two vowels together. When, two vowels go talking, the first one does the walking, you would think that you would hear that, but breaks the rules, avaricious. So something to remember when you have that I there with the O-U-S. You have different patterns, but a lot of English is just, from practice. That's why when I give you guys vocab, it's important to always listen to it so you can get the pattern in your head. So, we should have to disown you. So, anyhow, mean and avaricious. So, yeah, well, remember they played chess, and Mr. White kind of was a sore loser, if you remember correctly. So, anyhow, was very happy at the expense of her husband's credulity. So, the henpecking wife motif comes back. Yeah, she really likes how Herbert picks on him. But you know what? She is his mother, and maybe she's trained him to do that to his dad. It's not very nice, though. Aren't you supposed to respect your parents? So, anyhow, here we go again. She totally believes this paw. So, all of which did not prevent her from scurrying to the door at the postman's knock. So, making fun of her husband's credulity, his belief. So he believes the paw, and she's like, oh, you're stupid for believing the paw. But yeah, she secretly believes the paw too. The law of the paw. She believes it. So, nor prevent her from referring somewhat shortly to retired sergeant majors of bibulous habits when she found that the post brought a tailor's bill. So when she went to the door, she received a bill from the tailor. The tailor would be the person who would make clothes. Back in 1902, you can't just go to Macy's if you want to get a nice suit. So you would actually have it custom made. That's just a normal practice. Today you have that done. That's, quite a luxury. It would have been a luxury then, but it also would have been the only way you would have gotten a suit. So, this right here is, if you snoozed, you missed it. So guess we know how Mr. White paid him. He had a custom-made suit tailored because, she referring somewhat shortly. So she's, really, if you refer to someone shortly, you're not very happy with them. And, bibulous habits, the way that this translates is into, well, she probably thinks he, is a drunk, which, he did come and bring that into her home, and I don't think that was something that, she was taking part in. And, during 1902, you have a lot of people who are against alcohol usage. And so, in the United States, we actually ended up banning alcohol in some places, which lasted a very long time. And so I'm sure in England, there's a little bit of, teetotaling is what it would be. But when she found out about the tailor's bill, yeah, I love it. They never tell you how much, but we know it was quite a bit now. That's why he probably blushed. So they're sitting at dinner. So again, you have this flash forward, and you have to remember that in stories because they'll jump ahead. And we have that happen now. And so they're sitting back to dinner. I had to reread this because when you sit, he pours himself a beer. And so one of the first times I read this, sometimes when I read, I don't read every single word because, I get the point, and I've been, doing this for so long that I'm kind of trained on, what's important to skip and what I need to keep with. Well, sometimes I skip important stuff. And so the first time I read this, I didn't pay attention to this part, and I thought that it was in the morning. Well, it's flash forwarded. It's at dinner, so you have to really watch these, flash forwards or flashbacks, because you'll have authors that will give you a flashback where it goes into the past. And this is why it's important for you to understand plot so you can kind of track the story. You have to understand, characters. This is a story that also switches up names constantly, like Mr. White, Mrs. White, old man, or the old woman. And, you have to keep your character straight. It's important. It's important to go back and reread. So, anyhow, they're talking about the paw. So, they're having a conversation, and she stops. So, who's at the gate? She's just looking out the window. And this is kind of where it tells you, you have this strange story about the man that's, outside. And right here it says a mental connection with the 200 pounds. She noticed that the stranger was well dressed. Wow. So anyhow, she believes the paw, and she's like, wow, somebody that's dressed really nice is outside, and surely they're here to give me the money that I have, received from the paw. So this odd person who can't decide if he should go or knock on the door, he's watching mysterious movements of a man peering in an undecided fashion at the house. Peering, looking, peer, just an older word for look. You see it a lot in literature. It's, a higher word than look, not as, not, too high English, but it's a word that you guys probably don't always use with one another. So with that being said, a mental connection, so she sees the guy, 3 times he pauses at the gate and then walks on again. The 4th time he stood with his hand upon it and then with sudden resolution, so decided to go in. He's made a resolution. Resolution is like your decision. You make a New Year's resolution if you've ever heard that term. Oh, okay, so I don't know where we left off. My screen just went black. But anyhow, so looking, so down here, she made a New Year's resolution, or I'm sorry, resolution is like, you make a New Year's resolution, your decision of what you're going to do. So he was set in resolution. So he makes the decision that he's actually going to go in. He walks up the path. All right, so here we go. Okay, rising action is really taking off at this point. So she sees him, takes off, her apron. This right here, if you were caught up right here and you were like, article of apparel, that was something weird to you. Well, look, you may have known what an apron was. And the word apparel is just a higher English word, that means like a piece of clothing. So if you go to stores, you may, the word apparel would be a common word that you would hear. So she makes herself presentable. And she brought this stranger who seemed ill at ease. That is a fancy way of saying he wasn't comfortable. And he gazed at her furtively. He gazed at her. That means that, he looked at her. That's the more important word than furtively. Furtively would tell you exactly, kind of what that gaze was. And so he's not, gazing at her in a very excited way. When you look up the word furtively in your vocabulary notebook, I had told you that, actually, I don't even know if furtively is in there, but it's an attempt to avoid attention. But it's, important. You can probably pick that up just from the context of the story. So you don't need to, freak out because you don't know that word. Remember, words are important, but sometimes you can kind of get an idea of what they mean just through context and listen in a preoccupied fashion. So if you didn't know preoccupied, you have occupied, before. Okay, so it's kind of hard to get just looking inside of it. But he didn't really, he's uncomfortable. And if he is uncomfortable, then he doesn't, he doesn't want to, make eye contact. He doesn't want to be there. So she's, talking on and on and on, about, her husband and this and that. And, he doesn't even care. And he's like, I was asked to call. And he picks a piece of cotton from his trousers. I come from Ma and Megan's. Is anything the matter? Has anything happened to Herbert? Oh, this is where Herbert works, right? So, he interposed, enter. Remember, we talked about this earlier in the year. That prefix is between. So he interposed. So they're talking, and he interposed. So he interrupted their conversation. It's a fancy way of saying that. There, mother, he said hastily. Sit down and don't jump to conclusions. Quickly. Remember, there's a lot of meaning that you guys know. You just don't know it in the way that the story presents it. So you know quickly. There you go, hastily. So, you've not brought bad news, I'm sure, sir. And he eyed the other wistfully. Did you bring me 200 pounds? Still thinking of the paw, I'm sure. I'm sorry. Is he hurt? Badly hurt. Oh, thank God. Thank God for that. She broke off suddenly as the sinister meaning of the assurance dawned upon her, and she saw the awful confirmation of her fears in the other's averted face. He can't even look at them. It's not a good sign. So she realizes what badly hurt meant. She caught her breath, and her slower-witted husband, he may still be figuring it out, I guess, but anyhow, she put her hand on his, and they're very silent, and now her husband has probably figured it out because he was like, he was caught in the machinery, he said in a low voice. Caught in the machinery, repeated Mr. White in a dazed fashion. Yes, okay. So, you have to understand, this day and age. So when people worked at factories and different places, it wasn't exactly safe. And so he probably got caught in a machine and his entire body was, mauled by this. So this is like a horrific, accident. So can you imagine hearing that about your, son? So dazed as he's, we can't even believe what he's hearing. He's just dazed fashion, and a dazed, that's how he looked, away. Here they are. It takes tragedy to unite them. So he pressed his hand against hers as, they did in their old courting days nearly 40 years before. That was an old way of saying dating. That's what we'd say today, but you would court somebody before. He was the only one left to us. It's hard. Your son died. Of course it's hard, but anyhow, that's how they're handling it. Okay, so here's this guy. He can't even look at them. Like, why do you think he can't even look at them? I mean, like, we've been told this multiple times. Remember, when you're told something multiple times in a story, and here, and then, he didn't want to come in. You have that entire bit on the page before. And then, you have, that, like, he doesn't want to be there. And he can't even, he picks a piece of cotton. He's preoccupied. I mean, there's all kinds of clues. He can't even look at them. I mean, their son died, and he's from the place where this, he probably was he was an employee there as well. You would think that he would have a little more emotion. So something is a little weird here. Let's, kind of try to put our finger on this. So, she can't even breathe. Her face was white. I mean, she's like, all the blood has drained from her face. She doesn't know what to say. And this one is interesting. So remember, he wanted to go to India, to hang out, but he didn't understand his friend had been there at war. So it was a face such as his friend, the sergeant, might have carried into his first action. So that, fear or horror. And I want to say that Ma and Megan's disclaim all responsibility, continued the other. They admit no liability at all, but in consideration of your son's services, they wish to present you with a certain sum as compensation. Wow. So all of these words, you have like, boom, liability, consideration of your son's services, disclaim all responsibility. The prefix dis means not. So, if you claim something, you own it. They disclaim. So, he was killed in the machinery, and they're basically saying, we're not responsible. From the way he talks, this is probably their attorney. Don't you think? Lots of legalese in here. Just a little side note. So, in England, I was reading that, you have the Industrial Revolution, which happens, and 1820 to 1840. So, years ago, people lived in the country and on farms. Remember, from a celebration of grandfathers, the grandfather, lived in a different day and age than the child. And, they had a farm life. Well, what happened was you had different machines that were invented, like tractors, that did work that humans no longer had to do. And so a lot of people moved to the city. And they started looking for work at factories, kind of like at the factory probably that Herbert works at. And so anyhow, but during this time, they had a law. It was the Master and Servant Act. And it was basically where, if you work from somebody, you have to, just listen to them. And that's important. You need to do that. But it caused there's no laws that have been established for workers' rights. So yes, you need to listen to the person who employs you. That's important. But also, you need to work where it's safe. Unions are not such a big thing yet. Remember, when unions first came about, a lot of people probably, associated them. I'm not necessarily sure if it was, with socialism, but they saw them as, kind of as a threat. Well, unions were created to prevent injuries, and to protect people, if Herbert had a union rep, he probably, this would not have happened. So 200 pounds. Okay, so basically they're getting about $2,000 for their son's death. Maybe that was a lot of money then, but money, it can't, it can't replace life. And that's, kind of what we want to focus on here, but it keeps on going back to that paw. And so you have, the 200 pounds, which that's when you hear enough of that. You hear that, earlier when Herbert was playing the piano, but yeah, oh gosh, the paw. He smiled faintly. Oh, well, the paw worked, but your son died. But here he is smiling faintly, put out his hands, and dropped a senseless heap to the floor. Well, he isn't smart enough to get his own lawyer, I guess. So there you have it. All right. Part 3 coming up next.